try some things and look at Module 5. We're going to identify basic facts about antenna principles. Remember, you got to get 70% on the test. And if I'm not mistaken, this is like an 8-question test. I'll go back and look at it later and give you an update. Just remember, with anything, there's always an AFSC application. With this particular thing, you're going to be looking at a lot of information when it comes to antennas and the background on antennas and how we as RF transmissions are going to use that knowledge when we place an antenna in a certain area. So the first thing we're looking at with the overview is antenna efficiency. We're going to look at antenna waves, mutual interference, antenna gain, impedance matching, resonant and non-resonant antennas, law of reciprocity, polarization, and beam width. So let's get right to it. Antenna efficiency. Now these are just notes for me to go over so you can read them as I kind of highlight them. The big thing about antenna efficiency is how much that radio is going to apply to the actual antenna. Now, minus the cable that's going to have some loss. When it finally gets the antenna, it's not going to be, for example, if we had a 10-watt radio, we're not going to have 10 watts going out of that antenna. More than likely, with all the loss and the impedance mismatch of the antenna, we're probably going to get closer around 60-65% going out of the antenna. We're going to fool the antenna with couplers or tuners to make it look like it's a high efficiency. The idea is much of that signal out as possible. However, if you got one of them low efficiency antenna and you don't have a tuner or coupler, the big thing is you're going to have what's called reflected energy back. It's VSWR, voltage standing wave ratio. It's a bad thing when you start seeing that reflected power come back because it can damage your radio. How can you tell that you're going to have some issues? Well, if you start to feel your radio getting heated up, remember that duty cycle back in, I think, in the transmitters where they talked about 2080 and 1090? Well, that's that duty cycle because you're dealing with a impedance mismatch that the radio cannot deal with, or it is possible that you're dealing with battery issues too from that antenna because it's all going to come back at it. Now, there is one thing that we do use as an inefficient antenna, and you guys have touched it before, hopefully in the test equipment, and that's a dummy load. It's meant to be an inefficient antenna because it doesn't have a coupler or tuner at the end. The idea is we're going to absorb that RF radiation in a dummy load. Now let's look at antenna waves. Remember, there's 3 characteristics. There's frequency, wavelength, and amplitude. Frequency, how many cycles per second. Now it's CPS. On our older things, we will see CPS on there. And I think there is a couple of RF elements that was in the test lab that actually had CPS on it. But we call them hertz now. Kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz. The next thing is wavelength, distance between 2 consecutive points, as long as they are, like if you're looking at the crest or you're looking at the low point, wherever you take it, as long as you get one cycle in there, it is normally measured in a meter. Amplitude, volume control on your radio. One way to look at it, peak to peak. Again, frequency and wavelength are inversely proportional. In other words, the higher you go up in frequency, the shorter the wavelength is going to be. Amplitude, pretty easy to understand that, how big or how small the wave is. We got mutual interference. I've experienced one of these before. two antennas really close to each other, and sometimes the filters don't do very well. I've had this done in Lodges Field Azores, and if you go on the RF transmission website, there is a video in where I explain it. I think you have to get it in block 4, but I'm pretty sure I pulled it over into module 5. Just a suggestion if you wanted to take a look at something. Also, power cables have a tendency to do that too, where it bleeds over. You get like a 50 cycle or a 60 cycle hum on your audio equipment. That's not good. So next up, we have antenna gain. This is talking about directivity in the. All right, when you compare a omnidirectional antenna, which is all over the place, to a bidirectional antenna, you just now have gain when you compare those two. Now, there is a thing called an isotropic antenna. They call it DBI. This is the most simplest item that you can get out there and where everything is referenced to when you're talking about a vertically polarized whip antenna. It is theoretical. It is considered the perfect antenna. So in other words, if I got 10 watts out of the radio, it's saying that I got 10 watts out of that antenna. It is in a perfect sphere, and it radiates in all directions. So how do you get beyond that gain? Well, as long as a whip antenna can just deviate outside of that little azimuthal pattern, then they can say they have gain over an isotropic antenna. It's nothing more than a ploy, a selling point. So watch out for those. But when you compare it to a bidirectional antenna or even a unidirectional antenna, now you got gain. So directivity has everything to do. You can't increase the radio's power. In other words, you go, let's say, 10 watts to 20 watts. That's not gain. Gain is reference to the antenna. Next up, we have impedance matching. Now, we've talked about this earlier in transmitters, talking about a tuner or coupler. The idea is to fool the radio into thinking it has a perfect antenna. And idea is you want that antenna efficiency. Notice how it all plays together with matching, antenna efficiency, antenna gain. All this plays into each other. They're all linked somehow. So the idea behind impedance matching is we want to have that maximum power output. We don't want to have a standing wave ratio to come back at us. Please understand, the antenna coupler or tuners, normally the variable capacitor or variable inductor, in order to get that impedance as well as the frequency, because the frequency has everything to do with the impedance. Believe it or not, it talks about that wavelength. Notice how all this is interconnected. Because when we go to a resonant or non-resonant antenna, a resonant antenna is meaning that you have cut that antenna to that specific frequency and you will get it radiated an antenna efficiency that's going to be really high. You're going to get the best output from it. You're going to get really good gain out of it. With a non-resonant antenna, that's normally for your radios that's going to do multiple frequencies, and you got to have a pretty good coupler or tuner in order to match that antenna to the radio. The idea behind this is to make it look, or fool the radio into making it look like it has a resonant antenna instead of a non-resonant. Now you can imagine back in the earlier days when some of these portable radios didn't have a coupler or tuner in it. And that's the reason why they had those duty cycles in, not only to conserve the battery, but protect the radio. We got the law of reciprocity. Now, this one is mainly a definition, but it fits with everything. The law of reciprocity saying. Receive and transmit properties of an antenna are identical. In other words, if it can transmit well, it should be able to receive well. Oh, geez, it's pretty close to being a resin antenna. Antenna efficiency. Probably has a pretty high antenna gain, too. See how it's all interlinked? Well, anyway, when we look at polarization, notice I've got it highlighted. The E field determines the polarization, not the H field. E field. The idea behind this is so we can look at the E field and determine, well, this is how it's going to radiate. Now, there are some differences. We have linear polarization and nonlinear polarization. First of all, linear, vertical and horizontal. That means the vertical whip antenna is normally vertically polarized. An antenna that lays flat like this, you're looking at horizontally polarized. Now, when you get into the circular meaning it's doing like a circle, you also have something called elliptical, looks kind of like an egg. It's not an oval, it's elliptical, is what they call it. Now, the question stands, can a vertically polarized antenna talk to a horizontally polarized antenna? The answer should be no, but there are some backgrounds behind it. Okay, good. I'm recording this, so you should be able to go back over and listen to it when I finally post it. It's going to be unedited for just like that purpose. Okay, so linear polarization, because of the E and H field, they cross. They can't talk to each other. However, put them at an angle. Normally this part, which is the top of the mast, will be horizontally polarized. Get closer to ground, this part right here will be vertically polarized. It has everything to do with the ground. So the correct answer for a vertical talking to a horizontal, no. But there are ways around it. Can a vertically or a linear polarized antenna talk to a nonlinear? The answer is yes. I give you an example. Satellites, i.e. Sirius Radio, if you have one of those, or XM, when they transmit down to Earth, they are in a circular pattern. Your antenna on your car is normally horizontal or vertical, depending on what's in it. It'll be able to listen to it, won't it? Because with circular, yes, it covers both the vertical and horizontal. So that's the reason why those two can talk to each other. Right? When we look at increasing gain, should have been up there in another. Sorry about that one. Be up there with antenna gain. There's your isotropic antenna. Direction has everything to do with gain. Before I leave, I'm going to have to change that real quick. Then we have beam width. Now, with beam width, we do. With beam width, what we're looking at, and this is your half power, this is where the focus of this beam is. There's this line and this line right here. This is your half power beam width. This is the main focus of the full beam. As you spread out between here to here, that's where a lot of the power is being dissipated. So the focus of the whole beam right here, because you want to have one narrow beam this way, that's where a lot of this gain gets into play. And because of the half beam width, they classify this as the usable beam, because anything outside of it is basically, you can imagine how much noise is going to get on it. But I do want to point out, you'll see that we do have back lobes. You're going to hear that a lot when we talk antennas, there's always backload. So you could have a unidirectional antenna and still have an output behind you. Not as much as the front here, but the rear. Let's say that you're, 10 watts here. You might have somewhere in this general area in the back of behind here, maybe in the milliwatts. Not very powerful. So, what did we just do? We covered antenna efficiency, antenna waves, mutual interference, antenna gain, impedance matching, resident and non-resident antennas, law of reciprocity, polarization. Any questions? Comments?
No, sir. I enjoyed this more than the usual that we had going on.
We're changing it. Sometimes it takes a lot of falling down before we're able to get up and do it right, where you guys understand it. And after doing a lot of research over the week and weekend, this is what I've come up with. So hopefully this got through to a couple of you guys that are more audible and visual learners than the normal, what the heck did I just learn today? I don't know, but I got a KPC study. It happens. All right. I understand that. It just takes some time for us to put two and two together. Now, with our exercise today, again, this is a change up. We're going to be looking at antenna principles. We're going to be looking at the antenna efficiency, the waves, the mutual interference, antenna gain, impedance matching, the resident and non-resident antennas, and law of reciprocity, polarization. So here's what we're going to be doing. Okay? Wherever you want to go, I don't have a problem with. Okay? If you want to use the study guide workbook, you can. If you go out there and look at the internet, I encourage you to do so. By the way, don't pay any attention to the bottom part there. So I'm encouraging you, study guide workbook. Most of that information is where we got it off of the internet. So, you're golden. There's a reason why we have a bibliography in the back. Most of this information can be found in the ARRL book, as well as NEATS, as well as, I don't recommend Wikipedia, but if you go down to the bottom, you'll see most of the references there. Try that. Yes, I did online courses. Yes, sir.
I don't think the students have access to NEATS or the amateur radio stuff.
I can get on there all the time. Yeah.
Oh,
you can get on there. You just gotta. Yeah.
For NEATS.
Yeah, there's a online. In fact, I'll go look for it after this. I think I have it in my, logged into it to where you can get to it. I'm surprised you know NEATS. Oh, that's right. You're naval, aren't you?
Yeah, I try to keep the updated stuff in my.
Yeah, that's how I got most of the
anyways.
information. Is the previous module or block is where we got most of this information was out of the NEATS and the ARRL handbook. Anyway, I go back and rely on the information that we have at hand. Took us a while to find that, by the way, certainly. The items that we just covered: antenna efficiency, antenna waves, mutual interference, antenna gain, resident, non-resident, law of reciprocity. Now, why is this okay? This is not what I put in here. God, don't tell me I screwed. Oh, hang on just a minute. Now I know why. Give me a second.
Also, we don't have the SCLI documents for this Module 5. So the sergeant, the previous instructor, was copying and pasting it in the chat for us.
Here we go. This is the revised one. All right. What you're going to do is you're going to take these terms You can combine two or more tones. Notice what I did today. I combined some terms with an antenna. The idea is, for example, if you use antenna efficiency and you combine 3 or 4 of the below, then you don't have to go back to. For example, antenna efficiency, you could say, well, resonant antennas are an example of efficiency. This is the reason why. When we have mutual interference, it's probably because of a non-resonant. Notice what I've done here. Combine one with another, and now I don't have to go back and look at it. So the idea here is you're going to look out on the internet to see, or the Study Guide workbook, in showing how each one of these can be affected with another. So by the time you're all done, you should be able to use every one of these in, let's just say, a couple sentences, maybe a paragraph. So you're going to look at how they're all linked together, and you're going to explain it, how they're doing it by using the terms. Again, I'm going to give you an example. With antenna efficiency, I can get a resonant antenna that's going to radiate most of the power out because I'm not getting a high VSWR for it, and that's the reason why I have really good antenna efficiency, because this antenna is cut to the electrical wavelength of this specific frequency. That was 2 sentences. So you see how this is all going to work?